Hello and welcome to Dig It. I'm Peter Brown and hosting the show with me today is Chris Day. Hi Chris.
Hi Peter. We've seen the images and in person the supermarket shelves empty of fresh produce due in part to the crazy weather abroad, which has created severe fresh food shortages. We suspect this might spark yet another interest in grow your own home produce this year, as we all perhaps aim to become a little bit more self-sufficient. Today we chat with David Turner, the Marketing Service Manager at Mr. Fothergills Seeds. It's spring and many of us will be thinking about growing more plants than ever this year from seed. David, welcome to Dig It. And where do we find you today?
Cosily sat in a home office, I'm glad to say. A nice Friday at home rather than working in the main office.
Lucky for some.
That's nice. And can we perhaps ask a bit about yourself, David? How did you get into the wonderful world of seeds?
Well, I was frighteningly working this out the other day, and horticulturally wise, I've been in the industry for 35 years, which scared me slightly because I'm still only 18. But it started originally in a company that many probably won't remember, but a company called Fison's Horticulture, based in Ipswich. Mm-hmm. And I started there in customer service, and through various changes, I think you'll find the same with a lot of people in this industry. They might be working for different companies, but once horticulture's got hold of you, you don't tend to escape. And through, I say bad luck, it's probably good luck, really, redundancy, I ended up 12 years ago last week working for Mr. Fothergills Seeds, which was my first entry into the seed market in horticulture.
Okay.
And do you grow things yourself, David?
When I get the time, my wife's actually more into growing the seeds. We've got her set up. I moved into a new build a couple of years ago, so we had a blank canvas, and she's loving that.
Excellent.
Digging beds, not so much the veg. We've really concentrated ourselves on the flowers to give ourselves a nice area, if you like. It's a reasonable sized garden as well, so it's a nice...
A big project then. That sounds good.
Oh, God, yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit of a background about Mr. Fothergills Seeds by any chance?
Yeah. They started, I think people probably have a almost false memory of how long they've been going, but they started in 1978. Okay. So that was two chaps called Brian Carey and Jeff Fothergill. And they decided that the companies they were working for at the time weren't doing enough, if you like, for the industry, so that they thought they could do better. Yep. And so started Mr. Fothergills in a small building actually opposite to where the current building is, just a little, basically almost a cottage. Okay. And it was famously formerly Lily Langtry's, what would you call it, where she gets her horses. I can't even think of the stable. That's the word.
Yeah.
And they started over there with just a couple of people in packing the seeds themselves, sending them out. But over the years, they've tried to do things slightly differently, and they were oddly the first company to display the contents on the packets. So how much was in there and what was in there, which was interesting. You didn't usually get the count of seed. It would be a gram or maybe 2 grams. They introduced pictorial wildflower packets, launched seed collections. You didn't get those before them. And so they also started promotional seeds where you didn't used to get them. If you say, I think they've done various things like on a bottle of sherry, bizarrely, you might get a collar with get your free packet of seeds. Those kind of things that didn't happen before Fothergills. So I think we're proud to say we've led the way in a lot of areas.
Great innovation, I have to say. And I didn't realise, David, it was so recent history. I thought Mr. Fothergills had been going a lot longer than that. So there you go. Your mind does play tricks on you, doesn't it?
It does indeed, and I think that's great in a way, because I think people, many probably would have said 10, 20 years ago that they're the new boys, they're not going to come to much. But this almost false history. It's nothing we've actually done. It's just people have created almost this history. Or my grandfather always used to buy your seeds, and that's perpetuated and gave us enough kudos in the industry to build ourselves, and hopefully we've come up to scratch.
Well, certainly we stock your brand in the garden centre, and it does very well. And the feedback we get is the seeds are definitely a good brand. But I guess the marketplace is a very busy sort of marketplace, isn't it? I mean, you've got Thompson and Morgan, you've got yourselves, you've got some big brands out there.
Yeah.
Does Mr. Fothergills have any other brands that our customers would recognise, or is it just the seeds that you guys do?
No, we do have the seeds, but we also have ventured into the tools. So if you see Darlac tools in a garden centre, that is now owned by us.
You're behind that brand.
It is. It's an interesting one because you have a fairly static size of market for seeds, because you can't suddenly create several million new homes in the blink of an eye that are going to need to sow seed.
Yep.
And whilst we don't want to get away from gardening, and that is what we do, it's to grow, we thought that something that we could add to growing, so tools, digging tools, cutting tools, would be an ideal fit for us. And it was a company that had been family owned, again, very much like us.
Okay.
And they just got to the point where they didn't really have the resource to push the brand any further.
Yep.
So we had a sales team on the road, and we also had the location. So we took that on, I think it's about 4 or 5 years ago now. And hopefully you will have started to see that brand of tools appearing much more frequently in garden centres as well.
Well, we've certainly got 1.5 meters, I think, and have been supporting that. But I had no idea that was you guys as well. That's brilliant.
Well, there you go. It just goes to show our sales guys are doing their job.
David, Mr. Fothergills, am I right in thinking you are a global brand, though? You're not just UK based.
Oh, very much so. We export to in the region of 30 plus countries, but we also have actual subsidiaries, fully owned subsidiaries in a couple of different countries. The biggest, probably Australia.
Okay.
So they are actually, I think some people have got confused on social media in the past where they've looked up Mr. Fothergills, haven't noticed that the image has the Australian flag behind him. So we've had some rather interesting queries about whether products are safe with dingoes and things like that, which we have to back over to our Australian colleagues. But it is all the same company. It's just run separately. But the difficulty with a lot of these countries is that what we might consider a beautiful wild flower, they may consider an invasive weed.
Oh, okay, yes.
So we have to be very careful about ranges, and it has to be specific to some countries.
Excellent. And how do you monitor your own varieties of seed? I mean, do you have trial grounds, and how do you assess sort of what's a good seed to be growing?
Well, we do have a trial ground at the office, which I have to say, when it's in full bloom, is an excellent way to break any stress levels you have down. Okay. To take a 10-minute wander on there is great. But we trial a number of different things on an area. We don't have an infinite area to grow, so it has to be a little bit specific. But we will have new varieties that suppliers are trying to get us to sell. We will trial those to see whether they grow well or not. We will test seed that we have in our store to make sure that it is still germinating above the recommended rate so that we feel confident to pack them. Yep. We'll also trial varieties that are supplied by different suppliers claiming to be the same variety. And sometimes you can get some very interesting results where something that is supposed to be a dwarf might come in at 4 or 5 foot tall, and various anomalies coming on. But we try and get a mixture of these kind of things, and it's not just flowers; it's flowers and veg. We've always got runner beans on the go. We've corn on the cob. We have, which is great because we get to trial these things as well.
I was going to say, do you guys get to go and pick your own vegetables for the evening meal and take them home? Or is it only for the directors? They get to have the cream of the crop.
No. What tends to happen is because it's a trial, things have to be measured, weighed, make sure the yields are correct. Once that happens, then there's usually a couple of wheelbarrows appear at various entrances to the office, and a message will go round. So you might go home with a couple of courgettes one day, some squash the next. The best one, I think, as far as I'm concerned, is we had a rather large polytunnel. And we had a trial about 6-7 years ago of 162 different tomato varieties.
Okay.
And I'm sure you're aware, if you go near a tomato plant, the smell just makes you hungry. When you've got 162, you could walk this polytunnel and just want to devour the lot. But we had to do taste tests, and it was awful. I hated it.
Brilliant, that's good because tomatoes, like you say, they do have a nice aroma when you go in the greenhouse, and you can always smell when you've got tomatoes in flower. They're a good strong smell. But that's one of the joys.
It's absolutely delicious. Yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah, so, David, these seeds obviously you're selling. Where do you actually source the main stock? Because obviously there's a certain number which obviously I suppose you could grow in-house effectively, but in view of the massive range of varieties you're doing, where do they come from, may I ask?
Well, they're far-flung places, to be honest, because the UK, you can get supplies from the UK, but the nature of the beast is we don't have huge areas for growing seeds in. I mean, there are some salad growers, particularly in the area where I live in Norfolk. There's quite a lot of salad growers that grow in quantity that can be harvested for seed. But I would say the majority is probably Holland. We get some from the US, and there are one or two that come from farther flung places, usually if it's specifically a variety that doesn't do well necessarily in conditions elsewhere. But what we do try for the UK market anyway is to ensure that they are for the UK climate. The question you often get at shows is, can I take these and grow them in a hot climate? Well, some would be okay, but we are selling product for the UK climate, which we all know is not necessarily very hot, if you exclude last year. But that's just how we have to do it. We want to make sure that people can grow what we sell. You go back to the trial ground, our team there, who are basically a team of two that do our entire trials, they grow them as you would grow in your back garden. The only difference being that we do have a large polytunnel rather than a small glass house, and we do have a large-scale system of pumping water around, because they wouldn't be able to do it with a watering can. But other than that, we don't use any tricks of the trade or anything to try and grow it. It has to be so that we understand the customer is going to be able to grow it in their back garden.
That's very important, isn't it? Yeah, I was going to say that's essential, isn't it? Otherwise, you're getting a very false sense of security with the plants you're nurturing, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you get, if you treat them like a nursery does, they're selling a plant if they're growing for their own needs and their own selling, and they want it to look as green, as bushy, and as floriferous, I can never say that word properly, as they get. So there will be fertilizer, there will be feeds going on there that a normal gardener would not have access to. And I understand why they do it, and it's perfectly legitimate what they do, but because we're at the other end of the spectrum, we're starting from that seed, then it has to be something that people can put in a pot or put in the garden and know they are going to get the majority of those growing into full plants.
Excellent. And just another question on your trial ground. Do you have different soil types, or so you can test sort of say how a dahlia grows in a well, not dahlia, so that's not a good example, is it? A sunflower would grow in, say, a clay soil versus a sandy soil, or is it just the one?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, we do have very free draining sandy soil at the trial, so it's probably the hardest type of soil to get a lot of things because the nutrients can be washed out.
Definitely,
but you're right. It would be, in an ideal world, we would have a nice quartered up trial ground which had all different soil types. Unfortunately, not really possible because you've still got to rotate crops when you do your veg, as I'm sure you're aware, with brassicas, etc. And so you might be trialing them, want to trial them in a particularly clay soil, but you've already grown them there. So it all gets very complicated. And I think we just have to try and be as realistic as possible. And obviously you can mimic some of those conditions if you're growing things in pots or containers out of that trial ground, if you like. But yeah, we have to go with what we got, sadly.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, if you need some nice sticky clay soil, we'll happily send you some down, because we've got loads up here in Buckingham. But yeah, free draining soil is fun. A bit harder to find.
It's the dream of many.
But like you say, I mean, I think that's the joy of plants, isn't it? It's that you guys will probably get feedback that these crops have done well, and that's why you sort of carry on with them. And if they're not... if they're not doing well in one soil, they might not do well in another soil as well, isn't it? That's it.
Exactly. It's the joy. It's because you're dealing with a living thing, and I think people forget that almost sometimes. So living things don't always behave the way you expect them to.
Exactly. Yes. If only they did. Yes.
Yes.
The start of the pandemic 3 years ago must have had a big impact on seed demand. I mean, I know from a garden centre we had to shut, so it was only the mail order sort of suppliers who were able to get the seed out in the spring. But how did it affect your business? Did you manage to cope with the supply and demand issues?
I think we just about did. It's almost you almost black out those times, don't you? When it went manic. I think in the first month of lockdown, there was something crazy. The traffic on the website was something in the region of 500 times what we would normally expect at that time of year.
Wow.
Wow. We were lucky in a sense because the way our buying was done for seeds, we already had seed in stock for the following year.
Okay.
So we just had to work our packing facility, our filling lines at 24/7 to try and keep up with the demand, but we had seed. So where some companies, I think, were unlucky and it landed at the wrong time, if you like, for them. If there can be a if there can be a good time for it to happen, it was for us. And I think we only had to shut the website a few times just so that the systems could catch up and our poor ladies in our customer service department could actually catch up with putting orders on. But and I stand to be corrected by anyone, but generally I think we managed to keep up with it.
Brilliant, that's good, because I know certain seed companies really struggled, and but that's good to hear. I mean, I know from my memories of it, well, half of the customers were sort of buying the plug plants and the bedding, things that we could do local delivery for, but the number of mail order
requests for seeds.
I mean, our seed stands were just absolutely hammered and
totally empty. And of course, then we were waiting then for everybody then to start, restocking, which of course just took a lot longer, didn't it, because of the situation and the fact we were closed for 7 weeks. David, can I just ask about Brexit? I mean, I know it's obviously in the news at the moment. Has that caused any issues for you, for Mr. Fothergills, in the movement of seed from destinations and such like? Is that? Yeah.
I think this is one that any seed company would tell you very much the same story. It has caused us problems, and it has been particularly on tomatoes and peppers
Okay.
have been hit. It's requiring certification to say that they are clear of certain pathogens.
Mm-hmm.
And if the paperwork, I don't know the full details to be honest, but I believe if the paperwork is not 100% correct, then they are rejected. Now, if a supplier is sending a container load of, say, one variety of tomato, which is rejected at port, that is then destroyed.
Okay.
It might only be a pallet load, it might be a container load, whatever quantity is, that is destroyed at port. Now, that means that those suppliers are saying, well, I haven't got any money for that. That's gone. That's my profit gone. Why should I supply to that country? Or even if it's a variety, one of the things that we're coming across is if it's a variety that sells well in the UK, but is not so popular in Europe, there are rumours at this stage and murmurings that growers will stop growing those varieties. So you could potentially lose traditional varieties that we have a lot of or use a lot of in the UK, but if Europe-wide they're not so popular, may well disappear, and it's a shame.
That is a shame, isn't it? So that's quite scary. All those varieties which we sort of take for granted just might disappear effectively, almost overnight, I suppose.
It has that potential. I mean, I don't want to be scaremongering or anything on that, and I think we may well in the near future things might change and suddenly it all becomes much easier. But we are aware of the situation and we are having to be somewhat circumspect about how we get hold of things these days. It's a shame.
So the marketplace is going to be changing then potentially. That's going to be an interesting one.
Potentially. You can't say either way at this stage, but there is always that potential.
And just thinking about seeds and sort of packaging, there's quite a lot of terminology on the packets, David. Can we chat about these terms? And sort of, I guess some simple questions would be: what's an F1 hybrid? Are some seeds are noticed are marked up as organic, and some are resistant, some are tolerant, some are what are the sort of basic definitions
in layman's terms?
Well, I'll try and run through those ones. So F1 hybrid. Normally, your cheapest seeds will be what they refer to as OP, or open pollinated. So if a grower is growing the seeds, you just rely on your bees and your hoverflies and other pollinating insects, and they zip between flowers, and you get what you get at the end of the day. An F1 hybrid is where a grower has taken two parent plants with particular attributes that they like and combined them, usually in a very manual way, and which can be as time-consuming as using a small paintbrush and transferring the pollen from one flower to another.
Okay.
But they cannot be grown en masse outside. They have to be strictly controlled to make sure that they get those particular attributes. And again, that tends to be why they're very expensive.
So that keeps them as a pure strain, I suppose, does it?
Yes, it is. People have wondered why when they take seed from it, say they've grown an F1 cucumber, as an example, and they've harvested some seed, and they grow them the next year, and the plant comes up completely different. That is simply because they are not from the two original parents, and therefore you're going back to one of the lesser varieties, if you like, that they were grown from. And so this is the reason why people say, well, why are they so expensive? It's just a manual process, a very labour-intensive process. So that's your F1 hybrid.
Okay.
Your organic is quite a tough one to pin down, really, but it's seed that is grown organically. So there's no artificial fertilizers. There are no artificial additives or anything. It is purely grown with water and natural feeds. So again, then you've got to get an organic natural feed, which this process goes so far back to try and ensure that you are growing completely organically.
Yep.
And we use the organic farmers as almost an authority to say, yes, we can put organic on this particular product.
Okay.
It's one of those things that has waned and waxed in popularity. It comes, it goes. At the moment, I think it's definitely on the increase again, and I think we will see more and more organic varieties. Again, difficulty with that is because you can't use pesticides. It becomes more expensive because it's much more difficult to get a bulk crop without things being eaten. So I keep seeing things to describe things that cost more at the moment, which is terrible thing to say. Resistance and tolerance, two terms that I think can be misused and misunderstood. We very rarely in Fothergills use the term that something is disease resistant.
Right.
Because it implies that disease will never attack that plant. And I think if you say it has some resistance, which is much the same as tolerance, then that is truer of most varieties. Tolerance means that you've got a variety that might grow, say it's a tomato that has blight tolerance, and some of your tomatoes get blight. Those with a tolerance to it could survive a bit longer without getting that problem. So you might get a harvest out of them before they show too much sign of blight. But to actually have a variety that is blight resistant, I think I could probably say that I have heard of one tomato, possibly two, that are fully resistant. And we haven't trialled them, so I'm not going to say either way on that. But it's a grey area with how things are described. I think I would be happier saying that our varieties that can deal with any kind of disease are tolerant.
Yeah, so thanks for the clarification, because that is a much asked question at the garden centre. Yes. David, as we know, the packet seed market has changed so much over the last 3, 4, 5 decades. I can remember actually going, when I first bought my first packet of seeds, I can remember it was the Sutton's brand, and I didn't buy them from the gardens. And I bought them from a hardware store because we didn't really have any decent garden centre. We had nurseries, so that's my sort of lasting impression at that time. It's obviously changed, hasn't it? I mean, the technology in producing seed and how seed is marketed has moved on obviously a lot in those years.
Yeah, and it's a strange one because technology, oddly, doesn't really touch seeds. Again, it's a living thing. You can't say technology has. I think the packing has definitely improved. We've got much more environmentally friendly inks on the packets than we used to have. There are water-based inks. You use paper packets rather than plasticized packets. Those kind of sides of the technology, yes, they have definitely improved, and I think it can only be a good thing. Seed itself, I mean, there's been coating of seeds. Not fully convinced that was something that really worked. Other than that, it's going to be your packing machinery, the speed with which things can be packed. When Fothergills started in '78, they were hand filling, and obviously
a lot of pairs of very small scales somewhere there.
Yes, indeed, and the scale that things have gone up. We've got, I I'd hate to think how many packing machines we have now, but I think we have potential to pack over 100 million packets a year if everything was running at full capacity 24 hours a day.
Yep.
Then we could do over 100 million packets. We don't, because we don't need to. But as things change, and hopefully there would come a time, then yes, great. If we could pack and sell that many seeds, I'm sure everyone would be very happy.
Definitely. And one thing I've noticed is the likes of sort of what I'll call industrial seeds or seed processes, as in seed tapes, and now the latest sort of fad that I've seen is these little pots that come with compost and seed in them, and all you have to do is put some water on them and off they go. Are there any other sort of things like that you know of in the pipeline, and are they really suitable for the home gardener, or is it really just a case of, well, let's try and expand the market a little bit and see what else we can sell?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, to be honest. It's nice to have something within the industry that you can give as a gift, and I think that's where those little pots become really useful. It can be used as a trigger for maybe a young child to find out what happens. I mean, the compressed pellets of coir that you get in those pots that you were talking about,
yep,
they're quite fun to watch. You put water in, they expand, which, what kid doesn't like filling up a sink full of compost because it started off as a small disc, those kind of things. Tapes and mats, I think they do have a definite place, and the simplicity of someone with a container garden, they don't have a lot of space, to be able to put a pre-sown mat in and know that they will have a crop of, whether it be flowers or veg.
yep.
My favourite story about the seed tapes is I have attended numerous shows to sell the product at the shows, and a couple of ladies came on and they bought some of our seed tapes, I think a year or two before, and they'd got an allotment, but they had a lot of fun on their allotment. They were singing to themselves. They wouldn't be quite as neat and tidy as some other allotmenteers might like them to be.
Yeah.
And so they'd been looked down upon somewhat. So they bought a load of these seed tapes and went and dug up their plot. I think must have been an early evening or something, sometime when there was very few people there, and sowed these tapes.
Yep.
So they looked as if they were just messing around on their allotment, but once things started growing, they had these perfectly straight lines of veg. And their neighbours on the allotment could not understand how they'd managed to do it. But they, again, I think it is something for people that want to do this growing, but they don't know how far apart they should be. They don't like the idea of having to thin out. It's not lazy man's gardening, but it's an introduction. If it's something that pulls people in and say, oh, I can grow these, it's a nice, simple way of doing it, then great, because they may progress onto sowing a normal packet of seeds rather than seed tape. If we can hook them in some way to bring them into this wonderful world of gardening that we're all involved in, then great. I think those have a marketplace.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And thinking about the bestsellers, David, I'm sure you, in the office, you must have your boards up with what's selling best. I suppose it does depend on the time of the year, but say this, snapshot of a typical spring vegetables and flower seeds, what tends to be in your top sort of three of those?
I think I could probably rattle these off quite easily, and I don't think they've changed in the last, God knows how many years. I think in the 12 years I've been there, flowers, sunflower giant single, and sweet peas of various types.
Yeah.
Veg, you would have beetroot boltardi and carrot nant. I could put a bet on those being our top sellers at the end of the year. easily.
Aquadolce broad beans.
Yes.
There's definitely a pattern. I mean, I remember when I was doing the seed ordering every year, it was like, have we got enough Bolt Hardy? Have we got? And I think it's a reflection on what tastes good as well, isn't it? It's and what's easy to grow, and it is nice and reassuring in that sense that if you pick the winning best sellers, you're going to get quite a good crop. I mean, Moneymaker tomato, that's another one, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's why if you look at any range of seeds, you will always see those varieties in it. Whatever company is supplying them, they will have those in their range.
Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of tradition, isn't it? Sort of handing down within families, what varieties we've grown, and that's been probably passed down subliminally, perhaps. People see the seed packets or the labels from years gone by, and we follow the same route. So
you're not wrong, Chris. Because I mean, at the end of the day, I grow enorma broad beans, and I've obviously had the allotment for quite a few years, and I've trialled all sorts of different broad beans. But for me, enorma always does well, and it's always a nice flavour, and it's a good broad bean, or runner bean even, not a broad bean. get the right name. So you are right, doesn't it? You do follow sort of what your parents have handed down to you.
Yeah. I mean, my father always grew Tigerella and Gardener's Delight. Wouldn't change. Never changed what they grew.
Interesting, isn't it? How we are sort of it's what we are, aren't we? We're human beings, and we follow lots of traditions and lots of routines in our lives. Yeah,
absolutely.
And have you seen any sort of major trends or any shifts in seed buying in recent years? Obviously, we just talked about the fact we're quite stuck in our ways, but I mean things like I'm going to say miniature sunflowers. 30 years ago, I don't think they were really in the marketplace that much, and they're now, I love them. I think they're great sort of addition to the bedding plant for a nice flowering plant for the summer. Have you noticed any other sort of varieties that you thought, that's making a big impact on sales now that possibly wasn't there a few years back?
I think it's a strange industry because things go in cycles almost. I mean, you're right. The dwarf sunflowers, and I think they are great for beds and borders when you want the impact of that colour of a sunflower, but you don't want to have to stake them up against a fence or anything. They are great. But dahlias, they spent a lot of years in the wilderness of popularity. They've suddenly made a comeback over the last few years, I think. What else? Sweet peas come and go. I think there was also a period of time when you had these, what they described as colour shifting flowers, which were really popular for a couple of years, and that's disappeared. I think it's this strange attitude to where people think, oh, that's something new, when in fact it's something that's just lurked in the background for a number of years, used to be popular, and comes back again. So I think it's difficult to say trend-wise what has been the next big thing. I'm struggling to even think of anything that's really outstanding, to be honest.
David, one sort of example I can give now, because we do seem to get asked more at the garden centre, is going back to Peter's question about sunflowers, is the different colours of sunflowers, rather going from the traditional yellow. There's lots of lovely russet shades. There's a wonderful red one out there, I've noticed on the seed ranges. I mean, just, the change of, the perception of a sunflower, bright yellow, tall, that's moved away quite a bit, and I think that's quite exciting, certainly for the younger gardeners who are getting into gardening for the first time, maybe.
Oh, absolutely. I think you've got Evening Suns got a very nice deep orangey colour, and you've also got the ones, the multicoloured ones with the rings, like Magic Roundabout, where it has the darker ring and then it goes lighter again before the centre of the flower. And there's also these quite fun ones. They don't even look like sunflowers, really. These like teddy bear. They're almost like pom-poms of flowers. And I think these the breeding is quite interesting. What tends to happen with these things is a grower maybe has got, say, a 15-acre field full of a dwarf sunflower. In the middle of there, they notice this strange shaped one, which looks like a little pom-pom ball. Mm-hmm. Rather than weed these things out, quite often what they'll do is they will take one of this strange rogue plant, nurture it, and try and grow on the seed. And if the seed then produces a number also of that pom-pom, this is where you get the new varieties from. It's just almost like random chance that these things start. And then someone like our company will send along their seed experts to go and look at the trials each year of these big growers. And they say, oh, I like that. But the difficulty with these things is that you say trends. Trends is really difficult to follow in this industry because from that first sighting, it could be 5 years before the crop is large enough to harvest.
Yeah.
So that we've got enough to fill packets. By which time, trends have quite often moved on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite difficult to say that. But yeah, those kind of things are really interesting where what to a casual observer would be a rogue, a random thing that needs to be fished out because that's not what the crop is, can become the next big thing almost.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, and that makes it more interesting for you guys producing these seeds because it's something new to introduce into garden centres and to your online businesses, I suppose.
Indeed.
Yeah. David, obviously we've seen the rise of plug plants in garden centres. Both flowers at the moment. We do obviously all the kinder plants, but also for the likes of vegetable plug plants. Do you think that's having sort of an effect on? Is it having an impact on the seed business, or is it working very much in tandem with it?
I think it's actually probably working in tandem because you get there are always those people that will feel getting a plug plant means that the difficult work has been done, and again, as we say, getting people to actually grow something in the first place, does it matter if it's from seed or a plug plant? If it gets them into horticulture, if it gets them to growing, then your job is half done. We then have to supply decent quality seeds and the varieties that people want. But it's getting people hooked, and it's not difficult. I mean, you guys will know. There is so much joy at the end of the day to look at something and say, I grew that, I nurtured that, and now I'm either looking at it because it's a flower, or I'm going to cook that for tea tonight. And whether you've done that from a seed or a plug plant, you've still put a lot of effort into getting that there. And I think that sense of well-being and satisfaction is hard to beat.
And something that's obviously in the news all the time these days is climate change. And we've been discussing on the podcast the fact the RHS have moved their collections of gooseberries.
Gooseberries, yeah, up north.
Yeah. To keep them in a better climate. And obviously you were talking earlier about the fact that, say, a person growing a pepper plant in the UK might grow it in a greenhouse, whereas say if you grow it in Spain, you can probably just grow it out in your garden. Have you noticed much of a sort of shift in seed purchases and variety purchases with regards to climate change and how the fact that it's getting a bit warmer?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's been much of a shift as yet in purchasing, but we've already started looking because on the back of the packets, as with any seed company, you have a little sowing calendar.
Yeah, the little coloured windows.
Exactly, yeah. And we're already looking at this and thinking, actually, these are going to have to start moving.
Shift it forward.
Because, this is it. We already have a little bit of a dilemma because we have to do an average. And the UK and Scotland growing season is completely different to if you're down in Devon. Yeah. But you can't do individual packets for the different areas, just be far too expensive. But we already know that there are there are going to have to be some changes where we might say, so outside in March, that might have to be in April, or it might have to be so indoors to start, or an indoor one might well have to now be so or recommended to sow outdoors. There's lots of these things that are just have been happening quite slowly, but it's been a number of years since these things were last looked at, and I think it's going to suddenly become apparent that we could be a month out in harvest, in sowing, any of these things, and that's going to carry on, I think.
Yeah, it's certainly, well, like we were just saying, it is noticeable now that things are coming in. Well, I heard on the news yesterday adders are coming out earlier, and you think, well, they're a cold-blooded animal, and that's a real good indication that things are warming up when the likes of the reptiles are coming out earlier.
We've had some of the daffodils locally have finished. They flowered and they finished.
My word!
Wow.
So it's not all of them, but there is enough of a trend.
You think, well, that's a bit early. Well, just as a total difference to that, my snowdrops still haven't come out. I planted some snowdrops in pots, and they're about an inch tall now. They're just absolutely... So Northampton's very cold.
Yeah, you've obviously got a microclimate there.
That's it.
David, obviously, through your years at Mr. Fothergills, you've picked up some tips on growing seeds. Could we start with some tips on growing seeds directly in the soil outdoors? What sort of pointers would you give our Dig-It listeners? What advice could you give them?
Advice, probably, I'm not necessarily the best person to give advice. I mean, I would always say follow the instructions on the back of the packet. It's a bit of a cop-out, I know. But I think but it is true. What is on the back of our packets, of any company's packets, is recommendations as to how you should approach it. And you've got some seeds you will find have both an outdoor and an indoor sow instruction. And I'm guessing this is the same with other companies, but what we tend to do is whichever one you read first, whichever is above, is our recommendation. You can do it the other way, but we recommend you do it that way first. And I think anything to do with sowing is don't just go into it blindly. Do a little reading, even if it is just that back a packet of seeds. If someone suggests you do it this way, particularly if it's your first time doing it, follow those instructions. You might find wherever you are that actually the next year you do something slightly different, it works better for you. That's fine. But if you're starting out and you want the best results, just follow those instructions. They're not, hopefully, they're not complicated, but they will give you the best chance of getting a decent result out of it.
Yeah, very true.
You're not wrong, and it does make a big difference to sort of germination of varieties, doesn't it? If it says plant it under 0.5 centimetre of soil and you put it 3 centimetres down, it never pops up, does it? Yeah.
Very much. And even though there are some that you literally put on the surface, and people can't. They think they've got to cover them with a 0.5 inch of soil or whatever. If it says on the surface and just pat over, that's the way to do it. That is the best way to get results.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, the advice I was given when I was at college, David, was, when you see the first dandelion in flower in your garden, usually that's an indication that your soil temperature's reached a good level, so you can start sowing your broad beans and maybe venture out with some of your bolt hardy beetroot. But then you get I was going to say, you get a year like this year where we're obviously it's looking like March is going to be a little bit unpredictable, shall we say, with colder weather perhaps. The dandelions are in flower, but actually hold back. You've just got to work with the weather and with your own perhaps good instinct too.
I think there was particularly last year, was it last year or the year before, when we had the very warm February, March, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
And I think people were lulled into a false sense of security to go out and start sowing. Difficulty is we were still having cold nights, and people have to remember that it's that soil temperature that needs to be up around what I think they normally say 8 to 11 degrees, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if it's hot during the day but cold at night, the soil doesn't get up to that temperature. And if you sow too early, it can check seed, it can even rot it in the garden. So if there's a gadget someone wants to get a new gardener for Christmas, a soil thermometer, brilliant piece of kit, simple, but that will ensure that you're not sowing until that soil temperature is up to a decent level.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thanks for that one, David.
Yeah, that's good.
Cool.
That's good.
Sorry?
Okay, David. We obviously, this part of the podcast, we like to put our expert guests on the spot. So if you were ever stranded on that, virtual desert island, what plant or gardening implement would you like to be stranded with, and why?
Garden implement, I'm afraid I'm going to be very brand aware for our company. It's a tool in the dialect range called a hori-hori.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
The reason behind that is have a saw edge, a blade edge. It can be used to dig, cut, chop, and it could be used to defend yourself, I guess. If you're on a desert island, you don't know what you're going to come across. But I think it just has so many uses. Nothing would ever be particularly, you couldn't attack a tree with it, for instance. But if you had something to attack a tree, it would just do cutting a tree down. It's very likely you wouldn't get anything else. But hori-hori is something you can carry around and is, I guess, a jack of all trades, not necessarily a master of none, but really useful.
Excellent. Good stuff. And any plants you'd be happy to take with you or be growing?
Bucket of seeds, maybe?
I was going to say, I think you'd hope to happen to have a packet of veg seeds in your pocket. If you could get a couple, I guess you want something nice and quick, like some radish that you could grow really quickly to give a snack, and maybe something like some runner beans, give a nice long, heavy crop or something that you can eat and give you some nutrition.
Perfect, yes.
Brilliant, good stuff. And over the years, I'm sure you've talked to many people in the gardening industry. Anyone told you a good joke or anything you can tell us today that will make us have a little giggle?
I don't know. I guess the story that makes me chuckle the most was, and it happened to me, when I first started at Fothergills, almost the very first thing I was given was a pile of papers to apply to have a trade stand at the Chelsea Flower Show.
Right.
So jump into that with all guns blazing, because that was exciting, and it still is, to be honest. I still go. But when I was there, I had only been with the company, I started in February, so 3 months.
Yep.
Still new to the industry as far as seeds go and the variety of stuff we had there. So I'm on the stand, very nervous, not quite knowing what to expect. And this chap comes onto the stand and says, you work for Fothergills? Yes. He said, I want to have a word with you about your runner bean seeds. Oh God, here we go. I'm in trouble here. I planted a pack of your runner bean seeds, and out of the 20 seeds, only one germinated. And I'm thinking, oh no, straight away, I'm into a problem. So I was being very polite and explaining that, yes, of course, if we had the variety on the stand, we'd be more than happy to replace the packets or part of the guarantee, this kind of thing. And I'm speeding this off and feeling very self-conscious. And he says, no, you misunderstand me. When I checked the packet, the sow-by date was 10 years previously. I wanted to congratulate you, still getting some germination.
Oh, great stuff.
Brilliant. That's good. Because at the end of the day,
you don't know what you're going to get, but that was, I was in such a panic when he first started that conversation, but thankfully it was okay.
Great story.
That's it. And it's a good compliment of the quality of your seeds as well, isn't it? After all these years.
Yes, indeed.
Brilliant. Great stuff.
Fantastic, David. David, how do our Dig It listeners find out more about Mr. Fothergill's seeds? Obviously, they can pop into the garden centre and we've got a lovely stand of yours, but how else can they find out more about the brand and your products?
Well, we have a rather large website, which is mr-fothergills.co.uk.
Right.
And that has lots of product information. There's lots of not just selling the product, but there are blogs on there. We have some expert writers that put up information on there on a reasonably regular basis. You can sign up to a newsletter. You can request a brochure through there. If you like the physicality of looking through a brochure rather than looking online, it's all catered for. And it has a bit of information about the company history. So you can, I'm not sure, but you'll probably find some pictures of our trial ground on there as well.
Okay. Brilliant. That's really good. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for your time today, David. It's been great talking to you and giving us a good insight into the life of a seed company. It's something I'm really interested to.
Very inspirational and great to know more about the brand as well. Thank you, David.
No, pleasure.
Today's show was brought to you by Buckingham Garden Centre and Nurseries. The show was hosted by Chris Day and Peter Brown. The show was produced by Peter Brown. And our thanks to Chiltern Music Therapy for providing the music. Thanks for listening.
At Chiltern Music Therapy, we want everyone to know the difference that music can make in their lives. From parents and their premature babies in hospital to grandparents with dementia. We provide music therapy and community music services to people of all ages and needs across England. We work both digitally and in person in people's homes, care homes, schools, hospitals and hospices. Find out more at chilternmusictherapy.co.uk.